I didn't hear the suitcase scrape the floorboards. Didn't see the way she paused at the door, hand tightening around the handle like she needed to hurt it before she let go. My father coughed softly in the next room. I squeezed his hand, murmured, "It's all right. Just rest." The slam of the front door echoed harder than his ragged breaths. When I found the note, it was almost hidden, crumpled between unpaid bills and forgotten grocery lists. "You chose him. Now choose to live without me." I stood there staring at the words, the ink smudged like maybe she cried writing it, or maybe she spilled coffee and didn't bother to wipe it off. The kettle clicked off behind me. Dad shifted in his sleep. I thought I should run after her, should fight, should scream, but my legs stayed rooted to the stained linoleum. Maybe it ended long before tonight. Maybe it ended the first time she looked at my father struggling to breathe and said, "Why are you wasting your life on him?" Maybe. I had already let her go, long before she let me. The engine hummed low as the city blurred past us. Dad's hand gripped the door handle so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His breathing filled the car, raspy and uneven, the kind of sound you couldn't unhear once it settled inside you. "I'm slowing you down, aren't I?" he rasped. I glanced at him, the streetlights carving shadows across his hollowed cheeks. "No, Dad, don't think like that." He smiled faintly, but his fingers didn't loosen their hold. Truth was, every minute felt borrowed. Every trip to dialysis, a small negotiation with time, with grief, with the part of me that was already mourning. At home, the silence was louder than his coughing fits. Avril leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, watching me dump a greasy takeout bag onto the table. "Midnight dinner again," she said, biting into her words like they were stale bread. I ignored her, peeled the wrapper off a cold burger. "You're killing yourself for nothing," she muttered, not even looking at me this time. The microwave beeped. I didn't move. Maybe if I stayed still enough, quiet enough, she'd forget I was there. Behind me, the house sagged under the weight of things unsaid. The unopened mail, the scattered toys I was too tired to pick up, the photo frames tilted on the walls like they, too, had given up standing straight. "You think he notices?" Her voice sharpened. "You think he sits there counting the hours you waste?" I swallowed the anger rising up my throat, chewed slowly. Because if I answered now, I wouldn't be able to stop. Instead, I scraped my chair back, the screech cutting through the kitchen like a warning shot. "I'm not doing it for thanks," I said low. She laughed, brittle and bright. "No, you're doing it because you're addicted to guilt." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had lived too long carrying things that didn't belong to me. Deadlines piled up on my desk upstairs. Emails blinked angrily at me from unopened tabs. The kids' lunchboxes sat drying by the sink, ready for another day I'd barely survived through. Two worlds pulling at me. One that needed me to fight, and one that needed me to stay. And somewhere in between, I was disappearing. Later that night, lying awake on the couch while the television flickered noise into an empty room, I caught a glimpse of her through the kitchen doorway, scrolling on her phone, smiling, not at me, not for me, just gone in a way no slammed door could ever announce. The realization settled heavier than my father's breathing had earlier that night. Maybe I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore. Maybe I was fighting to remember the part of me that used to believe love meant staying, even when it was hard, even when no one thanked you for it. The house smelled faintly of disinfectant and old takeout. A jacket hung limply over the stair rail, one of the kids' shoes abandoned at the bottom step. Life paused mid-breath. I pushed the door open and froze. The suitcase was open on the couch, half packed, half forgotten, as if she wasn't sure whether she was leaving for a weekend or a lifetime. Our wedding photo, the one we'd posed for under a sycamore tree, lay face down on the floor. The frame cracked at the corner, like the day itself was trying to split apart in memory. She didn't flinch when she saw me, just yanked the zipper closed with a rough jerk. "I won't live in the shadow of a dying man," she said, voice flat, detached, almost rehearsed. The words didn't land at first. Maybe because I was too tired to process betrayal anymore. Maybe because part of me had been waiting for this. "And you can keep your guilt," she added, hoisting the suitcase upright. "I'll find someone who chooses me." My throat worked around words that wouldn't come. Choose her? I had chosen her once. Again and again, every day. But love wasn't a coin you flipped between duty and desire. It was the slow, brutal art of staying. Even when it hurt. Even when the person you loved no longer recognized the way you carried them. The front door creaked when she pulled it open. For a moment, she hesitated. I saw it. A flicker. Like maybe she wanted me to stop her. But I didn't move, didn't beg, didn't make promises she'd already proven worthless. The door slammed behind her, rattling the thin window panes. Somewhere upstairs, the kids stirred. Dad's labored breathing echoed from the back room, uneven, shallow. I sank onto the bottom step, feeling the chill seep through the worn wood into my bones. The walls felt too wide without her anger ricocheting off them. The silence, too final. Had I done the right thing? Could I have saved both? A part of me, the small frightened part that still believed in fairy tales, whispered that maybe if I had run after her, maybe if I had said the right thing, she would have stayed. But the louder voice, the one forged from hospital corridors and sleepless nights, knew better. She had already left long before the suitcase ever hit the couch. Love isn't measured by who leaves first. It's measured by who stays longest, even when the room gets colder. I buried my face in my hands and stayed there for a long time. Long enough for the night to pull its heavy curtain across the sky. Long enough for the kitchen clock to count out the hollow minutes of being utterly, unrecognizably alone. Hours later, when I finally peeled myself off the stairs, I wandered back to Dad's room. He was still breathing, shallow and steady, the oxygen tank humming quietly beside him. I sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to wake him. He stirred anyway, his eyes fluttering open. "You're still here," he rasped. I blinked hard. "Yeah, Dad, I'm here." A weak smile curved his lips. "Good. Thought I heard the door." "You did." My voice cracked. He nodded slightly as if he understood everything, without me needing to say a word. Maybe he did. Maybe dying people see the world sharper than the rest of us. Like the soul stops bothering with illusions when time runs out. "You're doing fine," he whispered, his hand groping weakly until it found mine. I squeezed it, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Am I?" The words broke free before I could stop them. "Feels like I'm losing everything." He gave the faintest chuckle, a ghost of his old laughter. "Sometimes, you have to lose what's rotting, to make room for what's real." The monitor beeped softly beside him, the rhythm steady. The words lodged deep, anchoring something inside me that had been slipping loose for months. He drifted back into sleep, still clutching my hand like a lifeline, and for the first time in a long while I let myself believe maybe losing her wasn't the end of everything. Maybe it was the beginning of something I hadn't yet learned how to live for. The morning after she left, the house felt wrong. Not empty, just stripped. Like someone had ripped out the wallpaper and left the walls bleeding memories behind. I sat at the breakfast table staring at two pairs of blinking eyes. Sam poked at a soggy bowl of cereal, and Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit like a shield. Neither of them asked where their mother was. Maybe they already knew better than I did. "You want pancakes?" My voice cracked halfway through. Sam shrugged. Lily nodded, solemn as a judge. I burnt the first batch, scraped the blackened circles into the trash, and tried again. Tiny victories. That's what surviving felt like now. A week later, we packed up what little we had left. The rental house was too full of echoes, her perfume clinging to the curtains, her forgotten shoes at the back of the closet mocking me. Dad's house welcomed us with groaning floorboards and the faint scent of old books and something sweeter. Loyalty, maybe. The kids ran through the narrow halls, their laughter ricocheting off faded wallpaper. Dad watched from his chair, a worn plaid blanket draped over his knees, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured as I dragged another box through the door. I dropped it with a grunt. "And see what?" He gestured vaguely, at the kids, at me, at the house itself. "Life. Coming back." I laughed under my breath. Bitter, maybe. "I'm not sure life is what you'd call this mess." His eyes twinkled, the way they used to when I was little and convinced monsters lived under my bed. Mess is where all the real things grow. Nights were the hardest. After the kids were asleep, sprawled across bunk beds we barely managed to assemble, I'd sit by the kitchen window with a cold cup of coffee and a heart that refused to settle. Sometimes Dad wheeled himself in, a blanket over his shoulders, and sat across from me. We didn't talk much. Sometimes he just nodded, like he was checking that I was still here, still breathing, still fighting the invisible war no one else could see. "You look like her when you worry," he said once, catching me off guard. I stiffened. "Who?" "Your mother." He smiled sadly. "She used to sit right there, just like you, wringing her hands over things she couldn't fix." I stared down at my calloused palms. Maybe grief was hereditary after all. Dad's breathing worsened after the move. Short, shallow gasps. that made every trip up the stairs a battle. I offered to move his bed downstairs. He refused with a stubborn shake of his head. "I'll go when it's time," he said. "Not a minute sooner." Pride. Stubbornness. I didn't argue. There were some wars not worth winning. Instead, I adjusted. Learned the rhythm of his bad days, how his fingers trembled too hard to lift a glass, how he smiled tighter when the pain gnawed at his ribs. Learned the rhythm of the kid's new routine. Spelling tests, scraped knees, whispered fears in the dark about whether mommy was ever coming back. I answered every question with the same truth. We're still a family, we're just a different kind of family now. Some nights that truth felt like a battle hymn. Other nights, like a lie I told myself to survive. Once, about a month in, I found Dad sitting out on the front porch at sunset, wrapped in a blanket, watching the kids chase fireflies across the overgrown lawn. "You did good," he said, voice rough. I sat down beside him, the wood creaking under our combined weight. "Doesn't feel like it," I admitted. "Most days, it feels like I'm barely keeping them afloat." He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Floating's better than sinking." The porch light flickered on, washing everything in gold. Sam ran up, a jar full of blinking lights clutched to his chest. "Grandpa, look!" He held it out proudly. Dad reached out, his hand unsteady but sure. He cupped the jar gently, the way you'd hold something sacred. "Catch enough light," he said to Sam, "and you never have to be afraid of the dark." Sam grinned. I swallowed against the lump rising in my throat. Maybe he wasn't just talking to Sam. Maybe he was talking to me too. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I lingered at Dad's door longer than usual. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the lavender lotion the nurse applied to his hands. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. "You ever regret it?" I asked softly, stepping inside. He didn't turn his head. "Regret what?" "Staying, loving, even when it got hard." The silence stretched thin between us, fragile as spun glass. Finally, he spoke. "Regret isn't about the choice," he said. "It's about the reasons." I frowned, confused. "You stayed for the right reasons, son," he murmured. "That's the only kind of staying that matters." I sat down in the chair by his bed, the one that had become as familiar as my own shadow. Outside, a storm was rolling in. Low grumbles of thunder, the scent of rain in the air. Inside, the house held steady. We held steady. 2 men and a half-built life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was real. And it was ours. The night before he passed, Dad asked to tuck Lily into bed. It took him 3 tries to stand. By the time he shuffled to her room, the air was thick with the scent of lavender lotion and the low hum of his oxygen tank. I stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, watching. He perched on the edge of her bed, wheezing softly, but his voice when he spoke was clear, stronger than it had been in weeks. "There was once a knight," he said, "who stood at his post even when the world forgot about him." Lily clutched her blanket tighter, eyes wide. "He stayed through the storms, through the hunger, through the nights when even the stars gave up." Her small voice broke the silence. "Why didn't he leave?" Dad smiled, brushing a shaky hand over her hair. "Because he made a promise. And real promises," he said, "aren't broken just because they get hard to keep." When he kissed her forehead and turned back toward me, there was a lightness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, as if something had finally been set right. I helped him back to his bed, tucked him in. "See you in the morning," I said, squeezing his hand. He squeezed back, a frail flutter of strength. "Good night, son," the last words he ever said to me. The next morning, he was gone. I found him just past sunrise, the room bathed in a pale, forgiving light. His face was peaceful. No more pain creasing his brow, no more rattling in his chest. His hand was still outstretched toward the empty space beside him, as if reaching for a dream he was finally allowed to touch. I sank onto the floor beside him, pressing my forehead against the side of the bed. Some part of me expected him to stir, to scold me for fussing, to say my name the way he used to when I was 7 and thought scraped knees were the end of the world. But there was only the stillness, a stillness that wrapped itself around my ribs and squeezed until breathing felt like a betrayal. The funeral was small. Dad didn't have many left. Most had passed before him or drifted away when illness took over. Still, the church pews filled with neighbors, old employees, faces I barely recognized but who nodded at me with heavy eyes. Lily clung to my hand. Sam shifted restlessly beside me. I tried to listen to the hymns, to the eulogies, But my gaze kept snagging on the battered briefcase clutched in the lap of a woman in the back row, gray hair pulled into a bun, thick glasses perched low on her nose. Ms. Wren, Dad's attorney. When the service ended, she waited until the crowd thinned. Then she approached, steps cautious, as if she were crossing a river that might swallow her whole. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. I nodded, unable to find words. She shifted the briefcase to her other hand and beckoned me aside, down the narrow hallway behind the sanctuary. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "He changed it," I frowned. "Changed what, Ms.?" Wren opened the briefcase, producing a sheaf of papers, neatly bound and yellowed at the edges. "His will, a few weeks before he passed." I blinked, confusion and old resentment rising like bile. "I thought he left everything to charity," I said, the old wound reopening with the bitterness of betrayal. She smiled, not pitying but proud. "He was going to," she said. "He had the papers drawn up. Everything ready." Her fingers traced the edge of the document as if it were something sacred. "But then he saw you." I shook my head, not understanding. "He saw you choose him," she whispered, "when you didn't have to. When there was no money, no reward waiting. He saw your heart, not your hands." My mouth was dry. What did he do?" Ms. Wren handed me the papers. "He left it all to you, the house, the business, the accounts." I stared at her. "But the charity." She nodded, eyes shining. "He didn't forget them. Part of his wealth created something even bigger. The Margaret Foundation." My mother's name fell into the space between us like a stone into deep water. "In her honor," she continued. "A foundation for single parents, for orphaned children, a way to keep their memory alive through kindness." I gripped the papers, the weight of them more crushing than comforting. He hadn't just forgiven me. He had trusted me, believed in me. Tears blurred the ink into a meaningless smear. I choked out a laugh, small, broken. "He never said." Ms. Wren smiled sadly. "Sometimes," she said, "love doesn't need to be said out loud. It just needs to be done." Later that night, after the kids had fallen asleep and the house creaked with the soft breathing of memory, I sat at the kitchen table and reread the will, the clauses, the signatures, the footnotes written in Dad's careful hand. And tucked inside the back, folded so neatly it could have been missed, was a single sheet of paper. My name written across the top. No legal jargon, no lawyer's stamp. Just my father's handwriting. Yet you stayed. When it cost you, when it hurt, you stayed. I see you, son. I always have. Love isn't what we say. It's what we do when no one's watching. I closed my eyes, pressing the paper to my chest. Some battles you lose by winning. Some battles you win just by standing. And some promises, the real ones, echo long after the last breath is drawn. The knock came mid-morning, soft, hesitant. The kind of knock that didn't expect an answer but hoped for one anyway. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, glanced down the hall where Sam and Lily were coloring at the kitchen table, and opened the door. The man on the porch was older, mid-60s maybe, with kind eyes and a navy jacket frayed at the cuffs. He clutched a battered manila envelope like it might slip through his fingers if he wasn't careful. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice rough from a night of little sleep. He shifted, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. I'm Ellis, from the Willow Creek home." Blank stare. He smiled, patient. "The orphanage, out by the old mill road." Recognition tugged faintly at the edges of my mind. I'd driven past it 100 times. Never once thought twice. "I knew your father," Ellis said, holding out the envelope. "He asked me to give you this. After." I hesitated before taking it. The paper was soft with wear, like it had been held too many times by hands that wanted to say more than they could. "Would you like to come in?" I offered, stepping back. He smiled again, grateful. "Just for a moment." We sat at the kitchen table, the kids' crayons pushed to one side, a half-finished drawing of a lopsided tree between us. Ellis folded his hands together, thoughtful. "Your father, he wasn't a man who liked praise," he said slowly, "or recognition. He made that very clear." I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. He slid the envelope closer. "For the past 25 years," Ellis continued, "he's been funding our winter programs, the food drives, the scholarship fund, even repairs on the building when the storms got bad." I stared at him. Surely he had the wrong man. My father. I started, then stopped. Swallowed hard. Ellis smiled gently. "I know. He wasn't easy. Not warm, maybe." when it mattered? His eyes softened. He showed up. The words settled heavy in my chest, reshaping everything I thought I knew. I tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single letter, handwritten, signed under a name I didn't recognize at first. Only at the very bottom, in small, neat script. Did he sign it again? For every child who needed a hand, for every night when the world felt too cold, you were never alone. M. Johnson, your father. I blinked against the sudden sting in my eyes. He'd hidden this part of himself so well. All the stern lectures, the disappointed silences, they'd blinded me to the quiet work he was doing where no one could applaud. Ellis watched me carefully. He never wanted anyone to know, he said. Said real giving wasn't about who saw it. It was about who needed it. The letter trembled in my hands. All these years, I thought he judged me for choosing a different path. But maybe he understood sacrifice better than I ever did. Ellis stood, smoothing his jacket. If you ever want to visit, he said, voice low, the kids would love to meet you. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. At the door, he paused. Your father wasn't perfect, he said, but he was good. Long after he left, I sat there, tracing my father's signature with my thumb. The kitchen clock ticked softly behind me. The house creaked and sighed. A different kind of weight settled on my shoulders. Not the crushing burden of grief, but the steadier, heavier mantle of legacy. Maybe my father had been a stricter kind of knight, not one who fought loudly, but one who kept a lonely post in the dark, offering hope with no audience. And now, it was my turn to decide what kind of man I wanted to be. The front door swung open without warning. I barely had time to set down the dishes before she was there. Red-eyed, trembling, dragging the cold air of winter in with her. Her parents hovered behind, faces stretched thin, with something that wasn't quite grief. We didn't know he passed, her mother blurted out, voice brittle like a snapped twig. Avril ignored her. She rushed past me, straight towards Sam and Lily, dropping to her knees like some prodigal savior. My babies, she choked, wrapping them into an awkward hug they didn't return. Sam stiffened. Lily just stood there, stunned. I watched without moving, letting the scene unravel itself, letting the truth weigh the air down so thick it was almost hard to breathe. She pulled back, brushing tears from her cheeks, reaching for me now. I made mistakes, she gasped, but we can fix it. We can be a family again. The words hit the walls and slid down like cold rain. I leaned back against the doorway, arms crossed. Where were you, I said softly, when they cried for you? Her mouth opened, then faltered. Her hands twisted uselessly in the hem of her coat. No answer. Only the silence she left us with before. Only louder now. Her parents stepped forward, voices rising together. Talk of lawyers, rights, fairness. Avril straightened, something bitter flashing through her tears. If you think you can keep it all, she hissed, you're wrong. I'll fight for what's mine. I smiled, not unkindly, just tired. You already gave up what was yours, I said. Now you walked away. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. Maybe she didn't. Maybe neither of us did. The earth smelled damp and rich under the old oak tree. Sam fidgeted beside me, turning Dad's medal over and over in his hand. Lily pressed closer to my side, her small fingers curling into the fabric of my jacket. You okay, Dad? She whispered. I crouched down, smoothing the fresh soil with my palm. Yeah, baby, I said, voice rough. I'm okay. I placed the stone at the head of the grave, just like Dad taught me when I was a boy. A quiet mark, a silent promise. The words on the tombstone caught the last light of the sun. What we build in love, we leave in hands we trust. Sam crouched too, squinting at the inscription. Grandpa wrote that? I nodded. For all of us. Lily knelt and placed a dandelion beside the stone, her brow furrowed in solemn concentration. The sky burned orange and pink above us, the shadows long and stretching. I felt it then. Not the weight of loss pressing me down, but the steady hand of legacy at my back. A bridge, not a burden. We'll take care of it, I whispered. We'll take care of everything. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it.